Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's high school in Garden Grove, California built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, Zumwalt class. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think this story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. Don't religious people tend to embellish things? And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How many people in this room have ever seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Why? Because it doesn't happen. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity's true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah. That's actually from our TV show on Wednesday nights on DirecTV channel 378. If you don't have DirecTV, it's on Roku. Just look for NRB TV on Roku. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Western Georgia right now. It's called the internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, if you go to our website, crossexamine.org at that time, 9 p.m. on Wednesday nights, you'll see it. We're also on radio on a bunch of stations around the country, but it doesn't matter if it's on radio because it's podcasted. You can listen to it whenever you want. It's called the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. We actually do 2 of these a week. And so if you find podcasts, you can find the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. Again, we provide evidence for Christianity and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here this morning and tonight. In fact, this morning, we're just going to cover point 1, and then tonight we'll cover does God exist, are miracles possible, and is the New Testament true, and then take your questions. But why are these the big 4? First question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Well, you hear people saying there's no truth. You got your truth, I got my truth. All truth is relative. You've heard people say this, right? Well, if there's no truth, obviously Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either. Now, of course, there's truth, ladies and gentlemen. If there was no truth, would you ever go to school? Would you ever read a book? Would you ever be able to catch someone in a lie if there was no truth? I mean, lies presuppose truth. Of course, there's truth. We're going to cover that here this morning. Second question, does God exist? Christianity, of course, can't be true if there's no God. I hope to show you tonight through 3 arguments that God really exists. Now, these arguments are in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, you can show that God exists without any reference to any religious work. Before there was a Bible, did people know there was a God? Of course, we'll talk about it tonight. Third question, are miracles possible? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible, and no one here has seen a resurrection. So how can we believe in miracles and the Bible? Well, I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible, even atheists are admitting the evidence for. We'll see that tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament telling the truth? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if the documents are reliable enough to let us know if one particular event from the ancient world took place. If this event took place, Christianity's true. If this event did not take place, Christianity's false. What's the event? The resurrection. If Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday. Well, you do anyway, you're the second service. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, your faith, my faith, is in vain, as the Apostle Paul himself said to the church at Corinth. His first letter, chapter 15, he said, look, if he hasn't risen from the dead, forget about it. You realize that Christianity is a religious worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it's true by looking at historical evidence. It's not just someone's philosophy. You can see if this really happened. And that's what we're going to do. Now, the book will show you why the whole Bible's true if Jesus has risen from the dead. But some of you might be thinking at this point, wait, Frank, why should you even give evidence? Aren't we just supposed to have faith, blind faith, just believe it regardless of the evidence? No, 1,000 times no. In fact, even the Bible itself tells you to get evidence. I'm just going to give you one passage out of many. Here's what Peter said about this. He said, always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. Now, the gentleness and respect thing is hard for me because I'm originally from New Jersey, all right? But we're supposed to give evidence that what we believe is true, and that just makes sense. I mean, why should you be a Christian and not a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu or an atheist or an agnostic or make up your own religion? The reason you ought to be a Christian, why? Because it's true, that's why. All right, so what we're going to do this morning is just cover point 1, does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? All right, now whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson, right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. That was even lamer than the first service. You can't handle. He didn't say it that way. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. Here's how he said it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try that again. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't you always want to do that with Pastor Kevin up here? You can't. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't get anything else out of what we talk about here today and even into tonight, what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes, I think is the most important thinking skill I've ever learned. And to show you what a dimwit I was 33 years old, I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to tell you now, and it is so simple. And do you know why I didn't know it? I never had a course in logic. How many people in here have had a real course in logic? Can I see your hands, please? All right, you see these people with their hands up? These are the homeschoolers, all right? Yeah, we don't teach logic in public school. We ought to, but instead of teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them what to feel. And that's dangerous. Why? Because if you just follow your feelings without reason and without moral restraint, you're gonna wind up in a very dark place. Now, you've gotta discover what the truth is and avoid what is false. Because if you start living by false principles, one day you're gonna smack up against reality and it's gonna hurt. What we're about to talk about here is how you can detect false statements. And there are so many of these false statements in our culture today that what we're gonna use is something called the law of non-contradiction. This is a law of logic that you intuitively know, but you may have forgotten you've known it. And it goes like this. Opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. For example, we can't both be in Georgia and not in Georgia at the same time and in the same sense, right? It's one or the other, but not both. God can't both exist and not exist at the same time and in the same sense, right? He either exists or he doesn't, but not both. You guys with me so far? All right. We're going to apply this law of logic to several of the statements we hear in our culture today that are slogans. And a lot of people believe these slogans, but they actually violate the law of non-contradiction. And here's one of them. This is probably the primary one. This is a direct statement of relativism and postmodernism. If someone were to say to you, there is no truth, which is what relativists and postmodernists believe, what question would you ask this person? Yeah, if somebody says there's no truth, you're gonna say, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everybody see that this is a self-defeating statement? What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction. If this statement is true, it's false. Why? Because it's claiming to be true that there are no truths. It would be like if I said I can't speak a word in English. What would you say? Are you using English to say it? Or it'd be like me saying my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child, right? These are self-defeating statements. If they're true, they're false. And what you've got to get good at doing if you're going to avoid these false statements, and you want to avoid them because if you start living by them, you're going to hurt yourself and others. What you want to do is you want to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself by asking a question. So if someone says there is no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you simply ask, is that true? Okay, now you can amaze your friends with this. Why? Because you're going to be very kind. You're not making statements, you're simply asking questions. Someone says there's no truth, you say, hey, is that true? And see what they say, all right? Let's do a few more. Suppose someone were to say to you, there's no such thing as absolute truth. If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you gonna ask? Is that an absolute truth? No, that's an absolute truth claim right there, claiming there are no such thing as absolute truth claims. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Or you could, if someone says there's no such thing as absolute truth, you might want to say, are you absolutely sure? Because that's an absolute truth claim right there. Now, in our culture, it's more often hinted at, not this way anymore, but this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. I have my truth, you have your truth, you live your truth, I'll live my truth, we'll all get along. It sounds like we all ought to believe this, right? It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? Sounds like everybody ought to believe, oh, you have your truth, I have my truth. There's just one big problem with it. It's logically self-defeating. Why? Well, if somebody says there isn't the truth, only my truth, and you turn the claim on itself, you're simply going to ask them, is that just your truth or the truth? In other words, is the statement on top just your opinion? If it is, then why should I believe it? But if you're saying the statement on the top is the truth, can everyone see the first half of the statement says there aren't any the truths? Can everyone see that this is a the truth claim at the same time it claims there are no the truth claims? It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. It defeats itself. Now, I know it's very unpopular in our culture to say this, but I have to say it anyway. There's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, if you want to say you have your own truth, you might as well say I have my own math. There's no such thing as your math or my math. I mean, imagine if Pastor Kevin said, hey, Frank, can you stay an extra day here tomorrow and work around the church? We need a lot done, and maybe you could help me. And if you do, don't worry, I'll just pay you $10 an hour. You tell me how many hours you work. At the end of the day, I'll pay you. Now, actually, Pastor Kevin would never do this. He doesn't pay that much. All right. But let's suppose I stayed tomorrow and I hung out for all day. Like I work a full day, 15 hours. And I'm done. And he goes, okay, what do I owe you? I said, okay, $10 an hour times 15 hours, you owe me $150,000. He's going to say, $150,000? No, I owe you $150,000. I go, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. He's going to say, you're crazy. There's not my math or your math. There's just math. Now, parents, I'm not talking about the kind of math your kid brings home and you go, this isn't my math. I'm not talking about that, all right? I'm saying, look, there's one answer to a math problem. It's not my answer or your answer, okay? And there's one truth. It's not my truth or your truth. Whatever is true, regardless of what you think about it. Now, sometimes in our culture, it's not said this way. Sometimes it's said this way. Well, it's true for you, but not for me. You know, Christianity may be true for you. Buddhism's true for me. What do you say to that? This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, say, is that true for everybody? Is true for you, but not for me, true for everybody? Because if true for you, but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you, but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough, but that's because it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. It defeats itself. Actually, there's a practical way of dealing with this. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, say, sure, try that the next time you get pulled over. You know, suppose you're going 100 miles an hour down Highway 20. Cop sees you, pulls you over, walks up to your car, knocks on the glass. You put the glass down. He says, you were going 100. It's easy to get out of a ticket. You simply look back up at him and you go, that's true for you, but not for me. And you speed away. He can't give you a ticket if it's not true for you. No, if it's true you were going 100, that's true for all people at all times, in all places, when referring to you at that time. It's just true. And by the way, if Jesus rose from the dead, that's true for all people at all times, in all places, whether you believe it or not. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if he didn't rise from the dead, even if you believe he did, he didn't. It's a matter of fact, not faith. In fact, sometimes I ask people when I go to a church, I say, hey, do you think Christianity's true? And most people will say yes. And you know what answer I get more than any other when I say, well, why do you think it's true? They say, because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not something's true? I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, why is the Bible always talking about faith then? Well, there's two kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible's telling the truth. This is what we do when we try and get evidence. We call it apologetics. It doesn't mean we're saying we're sorry. It means we're giving evidence for what we believe. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you got to go from belief that to belief in. You see, there's a difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that is just of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, it's of the heart. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, wow, you guys are sharp this morning, huh? Even James said this, even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Do you know that if God exists, and he does, and if demons exist, and they do, just watch the news, that demons know that God exists better than we do? They're in the spiritual realm, but they don't trust in him. Why? They don't want to trust in him. They know that God exists, but they don't trust in him. There's a difference between belief that and belief in. God just doesn't care whether you believe that he exists. He wants to have a relationship. There's a difference. We know this in relationships, the difference between belief that and belief in. When I first met my wife 39 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. One is of the head and one is of the heart. And if you don't want to go from belief that to belief in, you don't have to. God's not going to force you into heaven against your will. So most of the time when the Bible's talking about faith, it's talking about the second kind. It's talking about belief in. After you know that Jesus is the Savior, trust in him. In fact, faith doesn't mean blind, like you don't have any evidence. Faith means trusting in what you have good evidence to believe that is true. Trusting in what you have good evidence to believe that is true. In fact, John, the gospel writer of John, puts belief that and belief in into one sentence. It's at the end of chapter 20, and I'm paraphrasing. This is right after Jesus appears to Thomas. And here's what John says. These things were written down so that you may believe that Jesus is the Savior, and by believing in him, you may have life in his name. You see the difference? Belief that and belief in. Now, how about this? You're going to hear this in our culture a lot. You ought not judge. In fact, if you're a Christian, they'll say, you're a Christian. Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? All right, let's leave Jesus aside for just a minute. Logically, what's the problem with the claim? If someone says you ought not judge, you're going to ask, is that a judgment? Or if they say you ought not judge, you might want to say, if we're not to judge, why are you judging me for judging? You see what they're doing here? They're making judgments. You say, wait a minute, Frank, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. This is in the middle of his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I know this is going to sound weird for just a minute, but stick with me, it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography that we now call a gospel, when he got to chapter 7, he went, here's chapter 7, verse 1. No, when were the chapter and verse divisions put in? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is important. Why? It'd be really hard to find your way around this big series of books if you didn't have numbers. I mean, imagine if you didn't have numbers in your Bible and say Pastor Kevin didn't have numbers in his, and one Sunday morning he got up here and he just had this big book and he opened it and he looked at you and he went, let's go about 2/3 of the way in. Let's see if we can find the same spot. That would be hard to do, right? You need numbers to find your way around. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. You can't do that. Now, actually, some of you are going to hate me for this, but I don't care. I'm leaving tomorrow, okay? This is why you should never say, we just sang a song about plans, but this is why you should never say that Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. Why? Well, who is Jeremiah 29:11? You know Jeremiah 29:11. All the plans I have for you, plans to give you hope, plans to give you hope in the future, plans to prosper you. Is that a promise of 21st century Christians living in Western Georgia? No. Who's that a promise to? Who is that written to? That was written to the exiles who were taken in 586 BC out of Judah by the Babylonian dictator Nebuchadnezzar. He took them in exile all the way to Babylon, modern day Iraq, and God, through the prophet Jeremiah, was telling those people that 70 years later, he was gonna prosper them and bring them back into the land. And actually, history bears that out, because in 516 BC, they began to build the temple again. So God had promised them he was gonna bring them back into the land. But it's not a promise to 21st century Christians. And when somebody says, I'm claiming Jeremiah 29:11 as a promise to me, I say, why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 as a promise to you? What's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is the promise God made to the exiles that went to Egypt that year. And he warned them, don't go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a birthday card. Happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. That is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. No! We're taking stuff out of context, ladies and gentlemen. The Bible is not a book of fortunes. You don't just open it and point to a verse and go, that's for me. No, you got to read around it to see what's going on. The same thing is true in Matthew chapter 7. When Jesus says, judge not, in Matthew chapter 7, does he stop right there? No, what does he say? He says, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, which is a judgment. You notice that, you hypocrite? Take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Then he goes on to talk about don't cast your pearls before swine, which involves a whole nother series of judgments. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge, it's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, if you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments this morning just getting over here. And now you're going, this was a bad judgment. This guy's crazy. What are we here? Look, everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. They judge the Bible's not telling the truth. They judge there's no objective meaning or purpose or future to life. When you die, you're just gonna become worm food. It's meaningless and hopeless. Have a nice day. These are judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? What was their job? What did they do? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. They were on the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, to whom Rome delegated day-to-day lawmaking authority. In other words, they were the politicians of Israel, and Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. What sweet and gentle Jesus did this? Yes! And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with these politicians, these Pharisees, and he's right in the middle of the argument with them when he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ? Can you imagine you're having an argument with somebody and you stop right in the middle and you go, your father is the devil. Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus really goes after these politicians. He says, what are you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites? You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No. I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. How many times you've heard those passages talked about? But many of you know those passages are true because you're divided in your own home over Jesus. And guess what? You ought to be. Jesus did not come to bring unity with the world. He came to bring unity in the church. And you ought to be at odds with people over Jesus. You're supposed to follow him, not the culture. By the way, all this to say, Jesus was tough. In fact, why did they kill him? Number one, because he claimed to be God, which was blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. And number two, he annoyed powerful people like Caiaphas, the high priest. I think Caiaphas knew Jesus was the Messiah. Why? Because as soon as Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, Caiaphas wants to kill Jesus and Lazarus. In fact, he says, it's better that one innocent man die than the whole nation perish. Caiaphas didn't want to lose his job. If Jesus is the Messiah, then there's no need for a temple. Why? Because the Messiah is the sacrifice. There's no need for a temple. In fact, where's the temple now? Yeah, look around. People around you who are Christians, you're temples now. But Caiaphas didn't want to lose his job. And by the way, we react the same way sometimes. In fact, if you tell somebody the truth and they get mad at you, you just helped convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. For you military people in here, and by the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. As Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. We don't want people pointing out the truth to us. We want to suppress that because we want to go our own way. So don't buy into this idea that Jesus was a wimp. He wasn't. He stood for truth, and we need to do so as well. But in doing that, we have to make judgments without being judgmental. In fact, Jesus said in John 7:24, he said, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. You have to make a judgment, whether to be a Christian or not. Everybody's making judgments. The only question is, are your judgments true? And none of us, by the way, well, I don't think I've said this yet, but I need to say it. Do you realize that you can get to heaven by being good? Yeah, you can. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? All right, so that means none of us are going to make it to heaven because of anything we've done. We're going to make it because of what he's done. That's why you can't be judgmental. You can't be looking down at other people saying, well, I'm better than you. No, you're not. You're still going to hell without Jesus. As someone put it, evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. We have to make judgments without being judgmental. Now, there are many more self-defeating statements that we could go through, but we don't have time. I just want to summarize this whole section this way. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everyone see that? Which means that relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Now, tragically, many of our high schools and most of our universities have bought into the truth that there is no truth. It's self-defeating. Now, why would you send your kid to a institution at 50 grand a year so some professor can tell your kid the truth that there is no truth? Meanwhile, they don't seem to have any moral sense at all. Somehow, many people on college campuses think there's no moral difficulty with Hamas coming across the border and murdering innocent women and children, beheading them, raping them. And many of these people are part of the LGBTQ community. Do they seem to realize that if they were to go to Gaza right now, they'd be the first people thrown off a building? And this is the kind of moral confusion that we get on college campuses. By the way, this is why we go to college campuses. And we present, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. We have 10 scheduled for this fall. Here's a picture of one we had at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and they love the Bible there about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And we have a microphone set up. We'll also have one set up here tonight for Q&A. But when somebody gets up to the microphone, if they're not a believer and they express any hostility at all, I'll normally stop and ask this question. And I recommend you ask this question of people who are not Christians. Here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No? I thought you claimed to be reasonable. How is it reasonable you wouldn't believe something that was true? Because it's not a matter of reason. It's not a matter of the head. It's a matter of the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God over their own lives. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Here's the problem. You can, young people, you can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun, but selfish and sinful things. Yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in here who's over 40 years old knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves, right? I'm gonna live life my way. It's gonna be all about me. No, you're not very long anyway. Who's gonna put up with that? Yeah, if you wanna make life all about you, follow your every whim desire, you're gonna wind up in a dark place. You're gonna wind up divorced, broken, addicted, alone, and probably prematurely dead. If you want truth, you gotta go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. Or if you want contentment, you gotta go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. But a lot of people don't want that. So what you need to do is ask them, hey, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? 99 times out of 10, as they say in Mississippi, the answer's gonna be no, because they wanna go their own way. Now, what can you do with somebody who says that? We'll talk about it tonight. What can you do to somebody who's not interested, who's apathetic or even hostile to Christianity? But ask, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Now, when we come back tonight, we'll review, does truth exist? Then we're gonna dive into, does God exist? Are miracles possible? Is the New Testament true? And then we'll do Q&A. Actually, I don't think we're gonna do Q&A. I think tonight we'll do all Q, no A. Everyone gets to ask a question, takes all the pressure off me. No, we'll do Q&A later tonight, all right? Now, whether or not you can be here tonight, how many can be here tonight? You're gonna be here tonight for the second half of this. Where are the rest of you unsaved people gonna be? Huh? What's going on? What I want you to do is take out your phone and take a picture, or not a picture, follow the link on this QR code, because I'm gonna send you the entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format, this presentation and about 10 others for free. If for some reason that QR code doesn't work, you can just text the word evidence to that phone number, 855-909-0582. It'll take you to the same place. All right, and I'm gonna send you these PowerPoint presentations in a PDF format. Now, we did bring some books and DVDs, and I wanna point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine, okay, just so you know. The book we've been talking about, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, will take you sequentially through the evidence that Christianity is true, from someone who doesn't think truth exists all the way to the Bible's the Word of God. There's a DVD set that goes with it that's 7 hours long. In fact, people sometimes get workbooks from our website to take other people through it, classes through it, small groups, Sunday schools, regular schools. There's also a book called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. We know there's a lot of garbage that comes out of Hollywood, but you might be shocked to learn that the top movie franchises over the past 4 or 5 decades have all stolen from the greatest story ever told. Whether it's Batman, whether it's Iron Man, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Wonder Woman, Harry Potter. Harry Potter? You would be shocked to learn how many parallels there are in all of these stories to the story of Jesus. In fact, the greatest hero of all is Jesus, and all these superheroes are all patterned after Jesus. So if you like movies, or you have a young person that likes movies, if they love any of these characters, they're gonna really love Jesus. That's what that book's all about. And the most recent book, Correct Not Politically Correct, about same-sex marriage and transgenderism, is a book that when it first came out, it's been updated twice, I was fired from 2 Fortune 500 companies for writing that book. In the name of inclusion, tolerance, and diversity, I was not included nor tolerated for holding a diverse view. Now, that book right there was just updated last year, and there aren't Bible verses in there. This isn't the biblical case. This is the natural law, common sense, medical case why both same-sex marriage and transgenderism are not good for individuals and they're not good for societies. You could give that book to an unbeliever, okay? And I tell the story in there because I say just updated it, why I was fired from both Cisco and Bank of America for having written this book, even though it was never brought up at work. So check all that out. I'll see you at the book table. And when we come back tonight, we're gonna see that not only did someone die for you, someone also rose from the dead for you. And we're also gonna see there's more to the Michael Monsoor story.